Okay, welcome to Chapter 9, Jacksonian America. Okay, the highlights again. Andrew Jackson was just elected, universal white male suffrage. This is the Jacksonian democracy is also known as the age of the common man. Okay, so it's union first, but the three major issues under Jacksonian democracy, it's Indian removal, Jackson and the Bank War, and actually the nullification crisis. Okay. Okay, Jackson was a man of the people. Okay, again, he was seen as an ordinary guy that had made it for himself, and so at his inauguration, it was crazy, kind of reflecting the politics of the day. So the candidates didn't campaign for themselves. They had surrogates speak for them. Okay, so there's a lot of supporters. This is kind of the closer to modern campaigning what we have. They had parades for him, barbecues for him, and so they went to go see him inaugurated. And his supporters, there was such a crush to go see him at the White House that they actually had to squirrel him out the back door, the kitchen door. Otherwise, he would have gotten squished at his inauguration. And apparently, there's a 400-pound wheel of cheese there, but that remains for another day. Okay, so what makes Andrew Jackson the man of the common people? A big step with Jackson is the expansion of democracy. So there's a broadening of the franchise. Again, said this before, the expansion of voting rights to universal white male suffrage. And this is kind of a longer story in terms of voting rights in this country. So originally starts off with white males with land or a certain amount of wealth. Then it's all universal white males. Then includes black males. After the Civil War, and then includes women, and then in the 1970s includes 18-year-olds. Okay, so when we talk about democracy, it's not always plain to see what we mean by democracy. Some of the other democratic reforms that Jackson had, he was a supporter of office rotation, that he believed that the government is simple enough that anybody should be able to serve in a government job. Okay, you can see the expansion in the presidential election. 81% of the people, and I think today we're around 60%. So that's an astounding number for the amount of people that are participating in presidential elections. Okay, so Tocqueville in America. So Tocqueville was somebody that actually came over to study the prison system, and what really caught his eye was democracy in America. And so, what caught his eye was that anybody could come here, and through the dint of hard work, and they kind of married. So you might come here as a German or a Scot or a Irish person, and you become American. Okay, and so this America was this great place where you could build a new life and become a new man. Although, of course, he didn't really talk about Native Americans, didn't really talk about slavery. Okay, so the second party system, Andrew Jackson, because if you remember, we came off the era of good feelings, but he wanted to distinguish himself from the other Republicans. So John Quincy, they're all Republicans, but when they ran in 1828, Jackson called him and his supporters the Democratic Republicans. And this was kind of a dig at John Quincy Adams, saying you're elitists and you guys cheated in the corrupt bargain. And so they were the Democratic Republicans, later shortened just to the Democrats. And it said, Andrew Jackson, you're an ass. And he says, thank you. So, President of the Common Man. This really starts with Thomas Jefferson, but Andrew Jackson, what he did, and because again there are people campaigning for you, there's the spoil system. So once you win, they expect some kind of patronage, some kind of job. Okay, it doesn't have to be a top flight job, but they expect you to hook you up with some kind of government job. Okay, and so you have the development, the further development of the spoil system. But again, it's not, even though he's known as the common man, Jackson had his regular cabinet, but he also had a kitchen cabinet. Okay, and in his kitchen cabinet were the advisors that would, his close friends from home that would give him advice. Okay, so even though he's the common man, he's not common in all regards. Okay, so one of the major issues was the nullification crisis. Okay, so if you remember under John Quincy Adams, there's the tariff of abominations, and John C. Calhoun, who was vice president, actually pens this theory of nullification. And theory of nullification says that a state can vote to nullify any federal law. They can vote to essentially strike down any federal law themselves. And if you remember back with Jefferson and Madison with the Alien Sedition Acts, this is the kind of same line of reasoning. Okay, that states individually can can strike down federal laws. And so, they want to be able to strike down the tariff of abomination, and then later, really in the back of everyone's mind, if the Union tries to get rid of slavery, they could strike that down. Okay, and so the debate is over our federal union. Okay, should our union stay together or not? Okay, um, Martin Van Buren, he's a cabinet member, and what happens is there is actually a storm brewing in Jackson's cabinet, and so there's this. The Secretary of War, John Eaton, is married to this woman, Peggy Eaton. And Peggy Eaton is the daughter of a bar owner in D.C., and her husband ends up dying out in sea. She ends up marrying John Eaton, and she has a pretty nasty reputation. And so all the wives in Washington, D.C., of the cabinet, they kind of give her the cold shoulder. Again, she has a bad reputation. They give her the cold shoulder. And Jackson's angry because Jackson sides with Peggy Eaton. And in his mind, that's kind of what they did to his wife. They dragged his wife's name through the mud. So he sides with John Eaton and his wife. Whole cabinet resigns except for Martin Van Buren. Okay. And Martin Van Buren will later ascend to the vice presidency. And so this federal union, it comes to a debate. It starts a debate about Western lands. And then Haynes stands up and gives a speech about states' rights and liberties most dear, and he favors states' rights. And then Webster, senator from Massachusetts, Daniel Webster, eviscerates Haynes in terms of it's not states' rights, national. The union is the most important, our federal union. Okay, and then people are looking to Andrew Jackson, which do you side with? And so even though Jackson in a lot of ways is like a Southerner, he's a slave owner, he is against internal improvements, but he is for the federal union. And so what happens with the nullification crisis, South Carolina votes to nullify the tariff, and Jackson gets the force bill passed, which allows him to raise an army, and his threat is he will come down there with the army and he will hang the first nullifier from the first tree that he sees. And all of a sudden the nullification crisis is over. And so the lesson learned for South Carolina is that if you're going to do something like this, you shouldn't do it alone. Okay, and that will be their lesson learned. So when they secede, South Carolina is the first state to secede during the Civil War, to start off the Civil War. Other states followed them shortly thereafter. Okay, so the white attitude towards the tribe. If you remember, Jefferson talked about the tribes being noble savages. Now they're just kind of savages, irredeemable, and because they're that way, they need to be removed. Okay, and so either through force or through coercion or through treaties, they are removed from the Southeast. Okay, and so we're not so much worried about the five civilized tribes, but Jackson is the one that passes the Removal Act. Okay, and his rationale, quote unquote, for removing the Cherokees is that they can't protect the Cherokees from white settlers, and white settlers keep on coming on Cherokee land. So he's going to move them west of the Mississippi for their own protection. Okay, and so some Cherokees go, and they actually, I think it's some younger Cherokees that actually they mislead into signing the treaty. And so they move, and the ones that don't move get marched out there on this Trail of Tears, which several hundred die along the way under brutal conditions. Okay, that's the Trail of Tears. Move into what is Oklahoma territory. And if you guys have been paying attention this past summer, the Supreme Court ruled that a big swath of land on the eastern part of Oklahoma is actually Indian land. Okay. So that's we just talked about Trail of Tears. Again, were there alternatives to removal? Probably. At that time, though, again, because the Americans' perception of Native Americans had altered, the writing was kind of on the wall for them. And certainly not that it makes it okay. But that's how Jackson and others saw it at that time. Okay, so the third big issue here is Jackson and the Bank War. Okay, so the Bank War, if you remember, the National Bank was rechartered after the War of 1812 to help control inflation. And what happens is there's a lot of Jackson's friends, like the con man, saying they can't get a loan from the bank, or I'm not a loan from the bank. The bank is making it hard to get a loan from other banks. Okay, and so the debate over hard and soft money. Hard money is like gold and sometimes silver, but primarily gold. Soft money is like paper money. Okay, and so the, the short version of it, how the bank controls other banks, is that every bank issues their own version of money, but it has to be backed by gold. And so whenever the national bank thinks some bank is being reckless, they will ask for payment not in their money, but in gold. And that will control how much gold you have, and that will control how much paper money you print up. And so the opposition is going to Jackson in 1832. They're gonna trap Jackson, and the bank is popular. It's done well for the economy, and they're gonna bring up the recharter of the bank. They're going to try to recharter the bank. And so if Jackson vetoes the bank recharter, the people will hate him for it and he'll lose the election. Or if he doesn't veto it, they will get the bank, which Jackson hates. Okay, because Jackson thought the bank was elitist, it benefited the rich, hurt the poor. And they didn't know Andrew Jackson because Andrew Jackson vetoes the bank recharter and still wins re-election. So Jackson at that point, though, is not done. Okay, so the question is, the bank is still there. It's not going to go away for a few years. Jackson still wants to kill it. And so how do you kill a bank? You take the money out of it. Okay, and so they take the money out of the national bank and they disperse it to what are called like pet banks. And these pet banks are just smaller state banks. Sometimes it's friends of his that own these banks. And they essentially kill the national bank. Okay. So, pivoting a little bit, the Taney Court, if you remember, the Marshall Court created the rules for a national economy. The Taney Court continues on with some of that. So, the Charles River Bridge versus the Warren Bridge, this is out in Massachusetts. The debate is whether a private bridge that charges a toll, can they build a public bridge that is free? Okay, and the private bridge argues that it will hurt their business, which it will. But who wins out? Does the private bridge essentially get to maintain a monopoly crossing the river? And the Supreme Court rules that no, in this case, the public interest outweighs the private interest. Okay, just because one company or one entity is making money, what's good for the public is ultimately the most important thing. Okay, and what we get is then we get the Republican Party kind of dies off, and the Whig Party is formed. And the Whig Party originally starts off as a party that is just anti-Jackson. So if you hate Jackson and I hate Jackson, we can be together in the Whig Party. Over time, though, they will get a little bit more sophisticated. Then, okay, so the Democrats and the Whigs, the Democrats, so Andrew Jackson's party had a greater emphasis on opportunity, as whereas the Whig for opportunities for the individuals. Okay, so you should do it. It's up to you. The Whigs were more economic union, so they were pro tariffs, they were pro internal improvements. And in fact, let me skip down here to Clay's American system. He thought America could be self-sufficient. So they would grow cotton in the South, they would feed that cotton to textile manufacturers in the North, and they would grow food in the West. And so if we had enough roads and canals and steamboats and such, we could become self-sufficient. That's Clay's dream of an American system. But of course, that calls for high tariffs. Of course, that calls for internal improvements, which the Democrats tend to hate. The Southerners tend to hate. So you get the election of 1836. Andrew Jackson is not going to run again. His vice president, Martin Van Buren, runs in 1836. Okay, and Van Buren wins the presidency. And almost immediately because of the banking policies of Andrew Jackson. If you remember, he dispersed the money into the pet banks. That causes inflation, and that inflation will lead to the Panic of 1837. Anytime you listen to hear panic here in American history, you should know it's like a depression. Okay, it's an economic recession. So the question is, what do you do? What do you do with that money, all that extra money? And so Van Buren and the federal government tried to pass the Distribution Act, where they pass it out to states, and the states just spent the money, so that contributed to inflation as well. then they said, hey, let's do this Independent Treasury Act. Okay, so they'll take all that money and they will put it in underground bank vaults. Okay, so no one can use the money. If there's not excess money out there, then it won't cause inflation. Doesn't really work, but it's a nice idea, I suppose. Here we are into the 1840 election now, and so the log cabin campaign. Okay, and here's the irony. So if you remember back in 1828, Jackson accused John Quincy Adams of being an elitist, of the guy that's using federal money to bring gambling devices in the White House. He said he ate off fine china and drank fancy wine in the White House. The Whigs flipped the script here in 1840, just 12 years later. So they accused Martin Van Buren of being the fancy pants, of um, eating off fine china and drinking French wine. William Henry Harrison, the hero of Tippecanoe, is their candidate. And Tippecanoe, William Henry Harrison, he runs the log cabin campaign. So the log cabin campaign says William Henry Harrison, was born in a log cabin, simple guy, eats hog's meat, drinks hard cider, and so he's a plain person's person, which would be great if any of that was true, and it's not. And on top of that, he's a war hero. But so there's a lot of mudslinging here in 1840, and William Henry Harrison wins the presidency. Unfortunately, William Henry Harrison also, oh, and his campaign slogan was Tippecanoe and Tyler too. So Tyler was his vice president. So William Henry Harrison was the guy that gave a hour-long speech out in the cold without a coat on, catches pneumonia, and dies in a month. So John Tyler becomes president, and the problem is that John Tyler is hated by everybody. John Tyler's not really a Whig, he's more of a Democrat. And so Henry Clay and the other Whigs think he's going to do what they want. And Tyler doesn't. He wants to do what he wants to do. Okay. And he's hated by the Democrat. He hates Jackson and he hates the other Democrats. So Tyler's a man without a party. And he's a man without a party. Essentially, he tries to form his own party and nobody supports him. So Tyler essentially will be one and done. Whig diplomacy, this whole bit we're really not going to worry about. Webster-Ashburn's a treaty that draws like the boundaries of Maine, but we're not really going to worry about that. Okay, so the most dangerous man, John Tyler, a man with no party and no political future because nobody likes him. Um, he is actually, yes, pretty dangerous politically. Okay, so that's chapter 9. So hope you enjoyed the lecture. Don't forget to buy the merch, and we will see you guys next time.